Greetings. My name is Tanishkka Aggarwal from DPS International Edge Gurugram in India, and my research explores the cognitive cost of convenience. In other words, it looks at cognitive offloading and critical thinking, specifically the impact of high frequency large language model use during adolescence. With tools like ChatGPT becoming deeply embedded in education, students are no longer just using technology to support thinking, but increasingly to perform thinking. My study asks a simple but important question: what happens to critical thinking development when these tools are used heavily during a critical developmental period? This presentation will cover the research problem, literature review, hypotheses, methodology, and expected outcomes. Firstly, the research problem, the cognitive offloading crisis in adolescent education. There are three reasons why this research question matters. Firstly, LLM adoption in schools has been extremely rapid. Within just a year or two, those tools moved from novelty to everyday academic use. Secondly, adolescence is a critical period for executive function development. Skills like reasoning, working memory, and cognitive flexibility are still maturing between ages 15 and 18. Thirdly, unlike earlier technologies, LLMs perform core cognitive tasks such as synthesis, evaluation, and argument construction, which are the very skills that education is meant to develop. Despite this, there is surprisingly little empirical evidence on how this affects adolescent cognition. My problem statement is that critical thinking develops through effortful cognitive engagement. Students learn to reason by struggling with complex material, evaluating evidence, and making mistakes. LLMs may disrupt this process in three ways: by reducing cognitive effort through offloading, by encouraging passive acceptance of fluent outputs, and by weakening metacognitive monitoring, which is our ability to judge whether we actually understand something. The concern is not just academic dishonesty, but a much deeper issue: whether repeated reliance on AI leads to a cognitive bypass, where skill development is replaced rather than supported. My framework relies on three key concepts. First, executive function, which includes working memory, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility, which are all essential for critical thinking. Secondly, cognitive offloading, which refers to outsourcing mental effort to external tools. While offloading has always existed, LLMs offload higher order reasoning and not just calculation or memory. Third, metacognitive awareness, which is the ability to accurately judge one's own understanding. This is crucial for self regulated learning, and it may decline if students rely on AI generated reasoning without reflection. Now, the literature review. The study is grounded in three theoretical perspectives. The first is desirable difficulties, which shows that effortful learning strengthens long term cognitive development. The second is cognitive offloading theory, which predicts that habitual offloading can reduce internal engagement over time. The third is adolescent neuroplasticity. During adolescence, the prefrontal cortex is highly experience dependent. If cognitive effort is consistently bypassed, then opportunities for neural strengthening may be lost. Together, these theories suggest that frequent LLM use may interfere with how critical thinking skills consolidate. Emerging evidence supports these concerns. Neuroscientific studies show reduced frontal and semantic network engagement when students use LLMs for reasoning tasks. Behavioral studies find negative correlations between frequent AI use and critical thinking performance, especially among younger users. However, most existing research is correlational, short term, or focused on adults. Few studies examine adolescents, and even fewer test mechanisms like cognitive offloading or metacognitive awareness. So we are left with a clear research gap, which includes a lack of longitudinal data, limited mechanism based models, and policy decisions being made without developmental evidence. This study aims to fill this gap by combining behavioral measures, self report data, and a longitudinal design focused specifically on adolescents. Next is the research question and hypotheses. My central research question is high frequency LLM use associated with reduced critical thinking in adolescents? And I test three hypotheses. The first is that high frequency users will perform worse on standardized critical thinking tasks. The second is that this relationship will be mediated by cognitive offloading. And the third hypothesis is that high frequency users will show lower metacognitive awareness. Together, these hypotheses move beyond correlation to examine how and why effects might occur. Next is the methodology. The study uses a quasi experimental between subjects design with longitudinal follow up. I compared two naturally occurring groups, which is high frequency LLM users and low frequency users. The sample includes 240 high school students aged 15 to 18, drawn from demographically diverse schools. An 8-week follow up allows me to observe whether the differences persist, widen, or diminish over time. Critical thinking is measured using the Watson Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal, which is a well validated standardized test. Cognitive offloading is assessed using a questionnaire adapted for LLM specific behavior. Metacognitive awareness is measured using confidence accuracy calibration during reasoning tasks. And the baseline working memory and academic GPA are also included as control variables to account for prior cognitive and academic differences. Let's discuss the procedure. At baseline, participants will complete all cognitive and self report measures. During the 8-week interim period, students continue their normal academic routines with no intervention, and there's a naturalistic observation and user stability check. Then at follow up, critical thinking is reassessed using an alternate test form to reduce practice effects. This design allows me to capture both cross sectional and short term longitudinal patterns. I will test H1 using ANCOVA, controlling for GPA and working memory. H2 is tested using bootstrapped mediation analysis to assess whether cognitive offloading explains the relationship. H3 examines metacognitive accuracy differences between the groups. And finally, a mixed design ANOVA evaluates whether group differences change over time. If the hypotheses are supported, high frequency users are expected to score 10 to 15 percentile points lower on critical thinking assessments. And cognitive offloading may explain a substantial portion of this relationship. And high frequency users may show poorer metacognitive calibration. Importantly, null findings would also be informative, suggesting that adolescent cognition may be more resilient than I predicted. Theoretically, this study challenges the assumption that reducing cognitive load always benefits learning. Educationally, it suggests the need for structured AI use rather than unrestricted reliance. At the policy level, it supports age sensitive guidelines for AI integration, recognizing that tools beneficial for adults may be harmful during the developmental stages. The limitations of the design might be that it's a quasi experimental design, meaning that it may not establish a direct cause and effect relationship, as the independent variable is not being um, changed. Then the self reported AI use might introduce participant biases, as the participants may underreport their AI use due to fear for judgment. And it is a relatively short longitudinal window. Thus, the future research would explore objective usage tracking, multi-year designs to conduct a longer longitudinal research, and I would explore differentiating the types of LLM use. To conclude, LLMs don't just change how students work, they may change how thinking itself develops. Adolescence is a uniquely sensitive period, and understanding how AI interacts with cognitive development is essential. This study aims to provide empirical evidence to guide responsible, developmentally informed use of AI in education. Thank you.